Are you thinking about buying a petticoat online? Worried that it might not be poofy enough? Well then, order an extra one or two, and in this video, I'll show you how to sew them together to get that poof that you really desire. What you'll need: 2 to 3 short petticoats from sites like AliExpress, eBay or Amazon. I'm using a total of 3 for this to give you a bit of an idea. If you want it more poofy or you are a plus size, please consider getting a 4th petticoat. Fabric scissors, pins, matching thread, tape measure, lining fabric, tailor's chalk, ruler, elastic, sewing machine and an optional overlocker if you have one. Let's begin. The first thing to do is separate with your scissors the organza petticoat from the lining and the elastic that it comes with. To do this, turn your petticoat inside out and cut off the seam that connects all the layers of the existing petticoat together. There are 4 layers in mine: a lining layer, 2 layers of organza petticoat, and the lycra and elastic band. Try and get as close to the seam line as possible. Once you're done, discard the elastic and lining layers. However, if you would like to reuse the lining layer rather than cutting up a new lining layer, you can certainly do that. However, please keep in mind that it will be a short lining layer when we add the new elastic. Repeat this process for the other petticoats. The next step is to stack the organza layers together. To do this, place the organza circles within each other. The good thing about this is that they have enough stiffness within them to stand upright as you work. Then pin them together. As a bit of a side note here, you will find that no 2 organza petticoats from these types of petticoats will be the same width. The easiest way to get them to go together is to first pin all the layers at the joining seam of the organza. Then stretch out the organza to find the middle points on the opposite side of the circle. Pin these together too. Make sure you're catching all the layers as you go. For mine, it's 6 layers. Then continue going around the petticoat, finding the middle sections between the pins and pinning the organza layers together. It doesn't have to be perfect, after all, this will all be gathered down. I'll explain in a little bit more detail later what I mean by finding the middle sections between the pins. The next step is handy if you have an overlocker. Go ahead and overlock the organza layers together, cutting off the jagged edges as you go. But if you don't have an overlocker, no problem. Use your sewing machine on a straight stitch to sew it together, then cut away any jagged points, and finally go over it again with a zigzag stitch to enclose some of the raw edges. Next, we move on to preparing the lining. Firstly, measure out your hips as they will be the widest measurement you'll need for this petticoat. Take that measurement and add about 20 centimeters, or about 8 inches for those who prefer the imperial system. Also, while you're at it, figure out how long you would like your lining to be. Then add a double width of the elastic that you're using and about 2.5 centimeters, which is an inch. Grab your lining fabric and measure out the length and width and mark it with tailor's chalk. Use your ruler to line it all up and then grab your scissors and cut it on out. Then on the long edges of the lining fabric, create a narrow hem. I like doing these as rolled hems using this special foot because it's easy, super neat and very narrow. Next, fold and pin the fabric in on itself, right side out. Sew it with a narrow allowance. Then flip it inside out and sew a wider allowance to create a French seam. This way, all your raw edges will be enclosed. I also then like to top stitch the seam down to make it super flush to the fabric. Next, take your elastic of choice and create a channel on the top of your lining which is a bit wider than your elastic. I personally like using a good thick elastic, so mine is 4 centimeters wide, and I add an extra 1 centimeter for ease. So what I'm pinning here is a channel which is 5 centimeters wide, or 2 inches for those who prefer. I measure and pin it all around the top. Then I sew it down directly on top of the seam line that I made with my rolled hem, leaving a gap in the backs for adding the elastic later. Okay, now onto the fun bit, adding the organza layers to the lining. Firstly, mark equal spaces around the lining with pins. Then repeat the exact same process on the organza skirt. The idea is that you have the same number of marking pins to match up. This will allow you to gather it down as you sew and have the bulk evenly distributed. Let me show you what I mean in diagram form. Here we have the lining. You have your starting point. From that point you can find the halfway point. From there you can find the quarter points. And then you can mark the points into eighths and even 16th if you want to go that far, or by halving the previous points. Then you do the same for the larger petticoat layer, pinning the same amount of points in. So even though there's a wider gap, you have the same ratio. Then it's just a matter of matching up the pins, which we're going to move on to now. Grab your 2 layers and match up the pins. If you want to do this super easy style, go ahead and pin and sew it directly like this. However, I want to hide my top edge of the sewing on the organza, so I flip the lining layer around and pin it in this way, with a channel for the elastic pointing down. I go ahead and pin the layers together. And then I sew just on top of my overlocking stitch on the organza, gathering the organza layers as I go between the pinned points. Then I flip it right side out. Ooh, it's looking like a petticoat now! However, to help the seam I just sewed lay flat, I go around and pin that seam down. Then I top stitch it down and the organza portion is now complete. Now for the elastic. Cut a length of elastic which is snug against your waist, but can still get over your hips. Use a safety pin and guide it through your channel. Next, sew the elastic together into a circle. I like to go over it with a few passes for extra strength. Then sew up your gap in your channel. The next step is optional, but it's very good if you're using a wide elastic like me. Stretch out your elastic and sew down the center of the elastic channel. This will keep your elastic from shifting or rolling over time. And with that, your petticoat is complete. What a difference it makes to add those extra layers! It is now so poofy and glorious that it will be a perfect addition under any short skirts, especially circle skirts like my TARDIS cosplay. This process takes me about 4 hours, where if I make a petticoat from absolute scratch, it takes me anywhere between 10 and 19 hours. I hope that you enjoyed that little tutorial. If you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribe for more cosplay and costuming content. I'll see you all next time. Bye!